Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another one of UGI's Israel at War briefings. Apologies for starting a little late. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Louise Jacobs and I'm the chair of UGIA. Since the beginning of the war, UGIA reacted immediately. Through our colleagues in Israel and working with our long-term and trusted partners on the ground, we identified those who needed immediate assistance, victims of terror, and those evacuated from their homes on the Lebanese and Gaza borders. We help provide immediate and essential assistance, such as food, water, shelter, toiletries, and baby supplies. We also helped establish day camps and pop-up schools for evacuee children. Latterly, we have sent volunteers on a birthright agricultural program to pick and pack fruit, and will now be assisting struggling businesses with emergency loans as Israel's economy starts to be impacted. But our major focus over the past 10 weeks has been on trauma relief and supporting our brothers and sisters in Israel. To give more details, I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Harvey Bratt.
In those 75 days since the outbreak of war and the most brutal attack on Israel in its modern history, an event unparalleled in terms of its scale and brutality, and the sheer terror that it struck in the heart of all Israelis, we have been very active on the ground, as you've heard from Louise, in many different areas of activity. First and foremost, though, on that of trauma relief. Of all the activity we have done, trauma relief is the most important. The atrocities that took place on the 7th of October and subsequently were unparalleled in Israel's history and took many different forms, from the victims of the immediate terror to those who were bereaved and the families of the bereaved, to the injured, to those who were taken hostage and their families, to those who witnessed the atrocities. And over the last 10 weeks or so, the need has not diminished in any way, it has only grown. It includes also those well over 120,000 who have been displaced from their homes at very short notice, including children who we have helped with many different aspects of trauma relief, as well as day camps and pop-up schooling. The need is almost endless, and as that need grows, so does our response have to grow. But in the depths of that darkness, there are rays of light. There are stories of incredible bravery, courage of soldiers as well as civilians, and the amazing volunteer efforts from the third sector within Israeli society, with an entire community, an entire country who have risen up and volunteered their time, their effort, their passion, their energy. But the reality is that the task in hand cannot be undertaken by Israel alone, by the Israeli state or its civilians. And they need help, moral, financial, from the diaspora. The UK Jewish community has been very supportive, has been very generous since the beginning, but there is still much to be done. I know that probably everyone on this briefing has given, whether to UJIA or to other organizations who are doing sterling work in the emergency phase of this crisis. But Israel needs us, and they need us more than ever. So I'm asking you tonight, during the course of this briefing or at the end of the briefing, please do dig deep, give again, and support our brothers and sisters in Israel in their greatest hour of need. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, go to ujia.org and please give as generously as you can, even though I know you have given again. Thank you, and I now pass back to Louise.
Thank you, Harvey. Now turning to our guest this evening. Eylon Levy is known to most of us as he appears on our screens on most days, or we hear him on the radio. He is British born, having been to UCS in Hampstead. He holds a BA in PPE from Oxford and an MPhil in international relations from Cambridge. He is an accomplished writer, having translated over 30 works of Hebrew non-fiction into English. He has served as media advisor to President Herzog, and he has worked as a news anchor at both IBA News and I24 News, before taking up his current position that we now see him in as Israeli government spokesperson. I would like to welcome him this evening.
Hello, Louise. Apologies
Hello.
for the delay, and
How are
thank
you?
you very
Good
much
to
for
see you
having me.
again. And
I'm
thank you.
okay, given the circumstances. It is what it is.
I know how busy you are and what a difficult time this is. So we are particularly grateful for you joining us here this
I'll
evening.
always make as much time as is necessary for my home community.
That is really kind. I'm going to start by asking you about where you see we are in the war at the moment, and what do you see perhaps as the next stages of this war? An easy question to start with.
Militarily?
Militarily. Let's start with militarily.
Militarily, we are in a difficult stage of the fighting now, as the ground operation has resumed. After Hamas decided to resume hostilities, we had a hostage release pause in place. On the 1st of December, Hamas decided to stop releasing all the women and children, to start shooting rockets at Israel again, and we're back in the ground operation. Now, this is intense, close quarter fighting in urban areas where our soldiers are having to go door to door, tunnel to tunnel, hunting down Hamas terrorists and destroying their infrastructure. We have uncovered to date 1,500 tunnel shafts and tunnels in Gaza, most of them hidden in schools, in mosques, in hospitals, and even in UN facilities. One of those tunnels was located just 400 meters away from the Erez crossing. It is 2.5 miles long. To put it into perspective, Hamas built a tunnel that is as wide as the Northern Line and as long as the stretch from Camden Town to Waterloo. That is what Hamas did with all the concrete. It was supposed to go to people's houses above ground, and it diverted towards this military machine that we are now exposing and destroying in the Gaza Strip. So we're closing in on the last Hamas strongholds in northern Gaza. It's intense fighting. Every Israeli dreads waking up in the morning and seeing a notice on their phone. IDF, the website has been updated because every day we find out more boys coming back in coffins. And in the south of the Gaza Strip, we're closing in around Khan Yunis. And again, intense fighting where we are uncovering tunnels and hunting terrorists. And continuing to destroy the Hamas terror state. This is going to take time. I wish it could end tomorrow. It would end tomorrow if Hamas surrendered. And that is the choice that we are presenting to Hamas terrorists now, as increasing numbers of them are surrendering and coming out with their hands above their heads, holding guns sometimes. Surrender or die. That is the choice. After the October 7th massacre, we're going after the whole of Hamas's governing and terror infrastructure inside the Gaza Strip. And that is something that we have incredible unity about inside Israeli society. This was a tectonic plate moment. This was an earthquake where everyone understands that this war has to end with the end of Hamas. We will no longer tolerate the Hamas terror regime as our neighbor.
Okay. There's been talk potentially of another ceasefire. Is there anything you can tell us on that, or is that not something that is likely in the near future?
It's not on the cards. We are going to continue this war until the end. We are going to continue until we have achieved our goals of destroying the Hamas terror regime and bringing back all of the hostages. And we deplore any attempts to try to end the fighting in a way that leaves Hamas on its feet. Because that would be telling the monsters who on October 7th burned, beheaded, and raped so many Israelis that they can literally get away with murder. There simply is no future for the state of Israel or the Jewish people in a world in which an army of terror can use such barbaric violence, perhaps deliberately designed to evoke Holocaust associations, and get away with it. And everyone in Israel understands that that is the only way the war can end. And I call this in a press conference the diplomat babysitter test. This war will end when it is safe enough for children to sleep in Kfar Aza that Antonio Guterres himself would volunteer to babysit them there. And until that day, we're going to continue because Israeli territory will not be a buffer zone against the Hamas terror regime. It will no longer be our neighbor. Now, diplomatically, we find ourselves at a perilous moment, and this is why it's important for me to talk to you and the British community as well. Because when the massacre happened, all our allies understood that this war must end with the end of Hamas. And we had Prime Minister Sunak standing here next to our Prime Minister and saying the UK wants Israel to win. Something I've never heard a British leader say before in any previous round of conflict. But the Hamas has been doing a very good job of deliberately maximizing casualties on their own side and manufacturing a humanitarian crisis in order to generate sympathy, in order to generate diplomatic pressure, in the hope that that is going to make Israel desist. And our job now is to hold our allies' hands and remind them of what they knew on the 7th of October and what they know now. Because our allies still want this to end with the end of Hamas, but they're feeling the heat. The British media, for example, ran headlines about Lord Cameron calling for a sustainable ceasefire. You have to go 12 paragraphs down in that op-ed to see that he said Hamas must lay down its arms. There can be no future for it governing Gaza after this war. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the headline of that column is that Britain calls on Hamas to surrender. And if Hamas isn't going to surrender, then we're going to have to continue fighting it. Oliver Dowden, the British Deputy Prime Minister, said at a commerce event just a few days ago, we must eradicate Hamas. Those were his words, we, because they understand that we are on the same side. And when the Prime Ministers of Australia and Canada and New Zealand also say, they call for a sustainable ceasefire, but they say, but obviously that's not possible until Hamas lays down its arms. What they are telling us is they want this war to continue until the end of Hamas, although whatever political reasons they have that I can't comment on, they couch it in terms of a sustainable ceasefire. But the UK still wants this war to end in a total Israeli victory. That is the only way it can end, and that is the only way that it will end. And we need to hear your voices as well as the enemy tries to, I call it Gaza lighting us. They make us doubt our own sanity, our own morality, our own humanity. They try to paint us as warmongers, and they're on the side of peace when they're simply on the side of letting Hamas regroup, when it spends every waking minute telling us it wants another October 7th massacre. We need to hear your voices loud and clear saying that Israel's right to defend itself is a right to win this war. There is such a thing as a just war. And after the bloodiest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, we are fighting a just war. Hamas started this war, and we will end it. And we will end it on our terms by ensuring that Hamas can never hurt our people again. There will be a ceasefire when Hamas runs out of fire, because we will never let it do what it did on October 7th, when it burned people alive in their homes. Never again.
That is a very clear message, and thank you for that. In terms, you spent all day dealing with media. I guess British media or British broadcast media as well as other media. What do you say to us about our own broadcast media here in the UK? Do you find it particularly challenging? I mean, we've heard some of the outrageous and astonishing questions that you've been asked by the British media. How do they rate with other countries that you speak to?
The British media is more hostile than the American media. I've had interviews with journalists who have been very tough but very fair. I had one just the other day, the BBC Today Show. I can't remember the name of the presenter. It wasn't Nick Robinson and it wasn't Michal Hussein. He was very firm, but I felt it was a very fair interview. We have problems sometimes with interviewers whose questions simply seem detached from reality. An interview with Matt Fry on LBC, and I told him, I hope that you are hearing about the Gazans who are speaking up against Hamas now. And he said, but you're not even giving them a chance to topple Hamas because you haven't stopped bombing them. They've had 16 years to topple Hamas, and if they won't topple it now, then we're going to have to do it for them. One of the things that I find most, I won't say upsetting, I don't let it get to me about the British media. British journalists sometimes have a habit of being very condescending and speak in a very didactic, school marmish tone that says, you're a naughty little boy, now sit on the naughty step and explain to me exactly why you have been naughty, which can be infuriating sometimes, but you have to take a deep breath. and present the facts and present our case as forcefully and unapologetically as you can. And remember that whatever problems we may have in certain quarters of society and public opinion, at the end of the day, we're speaking to the viewers at home. We're speaking to people who are watching TV while they're doing their dishes and washing the kids. And we need to make them think, gosh, if armed terrorists ever invaded my village and burned people alive and raped my children, I would expect my government to go to the ends of the earth to bring the hostages back and bring their captors to justice. And remind them of that and speak directly to the people at home. And I think that message is cutting through.
I think it is. And on behalf of all of us, we're very grateful for the way you do that tirelessly. I mean, I woke up that morning and heard you on the Today programme, and I went to bed at night and saw you on News at 10. So your days are incredibly full and incredibly busy. And you've been sort of catapulted into this position. You enjoying it?
Enjoying is the wrong word.
Enjoying is the wrong word. I mean, probably not what you're expecting.
Look, if you told me that in response to such a horrific tragedy, first of all, that such a horrific tragedy could happen, but then in response, I'd get a call from the Israeli version of Strictly Come Dancing asking whether I'd come on the show because I've become something of a national celebrity here, then I'd have told you you're absolutely mad. But the work I'm doing is resonating. It's resonating with Israelis who are glad to hear our case being explained forcefully and unapologetically. There's a lot going on around me. I have an incredible team of volunteers who are helping me produce content, repackage content, think of new messages. So there's never a dull day and never a boring moment. But sometimes there are moments when it hits me where you get swept up in the excitement and then the penny drops and you say, our soldiers are fighting in Gaza and coming back dead, and we still have 129 hostages who are still trapped there, and everything about the situation is just unspeakably awful.
It really is. No one ever expected us to be in this absolutely dreadful situation that we find ourselves in. We've had a number of questions from the audience, and I'm just going to read some of them out. I apologise that we haven't got time to do as many as I would like. One from Kate Glick. How does Israel win the PR war for long enough to meet its military objectives of destroying Hamas before the calls for a ceasefire are too strong? I mean, some would say we might be getting there.
The calls for a ceasefire will never be too strong because Israeli society is united with a profound sense of justice that this war must end with the end of Hamas. We view this in existential terms and understand that we simply have no future as a country if Hamas is free to do what it did on October 7th. We might as well pack up and join the first SpaceX ship to Mars, okay? We're going to go to the end. And the only question is, how strong and how robust are our diplomatic alliances and friendships around the world by the time we are done doing what we have to do in order to keep our people safe? Obviously, all of us want this to be over. We want this war to go away. We just don't have the luxury of making the war go away and then retreating to safety because there is no safety. So we want to end this war. We need to end this war in a way that ensures that Hamas can never attack our people as it did on October 7th, as it has done in the preceding 20 years. And how do we win the PR war is we fight. I go on the offensive. I think that after October 7th, we don't owe people answers. The Red Cross that says it's not even bothering to put pressure on Hamas to see the hostages owes us answers. The World Health Organization, which continues to cover up the fact that Hamas is digging tunnels underneath hospitals and using them to wage war, owes us answers. The UN agencies that are deflecting blame onto Israel about the humanitarian situation, even though we can facilitate 300% as much aid into Gaza, owe us answers. We think that they've let us down, they've let the Palestinians down, but they've also let the world down. I know that in Britain, people speak about the United Nations and international law with glistening eyes because they have this moral authority, and we want them to understand just how poorly they have been served by these institutions that have been hijacked in a way that makes them complicit with Hamas's war against us. So we need people to speak up. We're doing as many interviews as we can. Every day I have a press conference. Sometimes BBC, Sky News take it live. We're filming stuff for social media. But we need our allies and friends around the world to speak up clearly and unapologetically in support of Israel's right to win this just war, and not to couch it in terms of sustainable ceasefire, total Israeli victory, and to make it clear that when a proposal comes up to leave the Hamas rapist regime in power after what they did on October 7th, abstention is not good enough. If our allies are saying this war must end with Hamas laying down its arms, we need their voting patterns and diplomatic behavior to reflect that, because we know that we are fighting on the front lines of humanity. We're fighting for the most basic human right not to be murdered in your sleep. And we are fighting for humanity as well, because the same terror that affects us here will come around to the rest of the world. Britain has already had its taste of intifada in the 7/7 bombings and the Manchester Arena bombings. That's what globalized the intifada means, that the terrifying calls we're hearing on the streets of London. So we need our supporters to be louder, clearer in making those demands to policymakers to support what they already know and feel to be right. But they need to feel that they have strong backing, because otherwise it's just the mob shouting.
Yeah, that's a very clear message for something that we can be doing here in the UK. So thank you for that. There's been a lot of talk recently, particularly here, about a two-state solution, and we've had a number of questions about that. One of the questions was about the prospect of a two-state solution at the moment, but also one about, would it not be beneficial for Israel's image for it to take a more nuanced approach and say that it's not practical in the near future, rather than there cannot be a two-state solution?
There was an Israel before October 7th and an Israel after October 7th. In the Israel before October 7th, even the most pessimistic doommongers could never have imagined that the consequence of a territorial withdrawal would be death squads embarking on a campaign of systematic extermination like they did on October 7th. Now, the dust hasn't settled yet, but the lessons of October 7th will be that many Israelis will be, even those who accept the demographic case, accept the moral case, have been supporters of a two-state solution, they're going to question the strategic wisdom of surrendering control over the mountains overlooking Tel Aviv and surrounding Jerusalem to the Palestinians, 82% of whom think that the October 7th massacre was justified despite everything that has happened in Gaza since, knowing the barbaric violence that Palestinian terrorists are happy to use. And I use that word advisedly, happy, given the cheers of jubilation that we see in the Hamas atrocity videos. And I was actually making this point to Secunda Kermani from Channel 4. We wrapped up an interview in Sarona in Tel Aviv, and immediately there was a rocket siren, and we had to run into the bomb shelter together. And I told him, Secunda, if this were coming from the West Bank, we'd have 20 seconds as opposed to 90 seconds. And I said, the lessons that Israelis have drawn from territorial withdrawals, from Lebanon in 2000, from Gaza in 2005, is that these power vacuums get filled by the barbaric forces of terror, which on October 7th proved to be even more barbaric than we could imagine in our worst nightmares. And if you want Israel to effect any sort of territorial withdrawal, you need to convince Israelis that what happened in Gaza will not happen times 20 in the West Bank. Until you can do that, there's simply nothing to talk about. Now, the Prime Minister's position has been consistently, we should give the Palestinians all the powers to govern themselves and none of the powers to threaten us. Now, whether you want to call that a state minus, these are different questions, and there's going to be a time for discussions, diplomatic discussions about long-term solutions. But what is clear to everyone in Israel is we are never going to relinquish control for our security in the hands of other people, especially when they tell us that they think this sort of barbaric violence is justified. And that's why we say that what has to happen in the Gaza Strip the day after has to be not only demilitarization, but de-radicalization. The next generation of Palestinians cannot be brought up on a diet of jihad and martyrdom and told that they have a right to use violent struggle to eliminate the state of Israel, which is what so many people on the streets of Western capitals are telling them. Because unless the world tells them some hard truths, we're going to find ourselves in the same cycle of violence over and over again. And if one thing is clear to anyone who supports peace, which we all do, of course, even if we disagree on how that should look. It's that Hamas has no place, has no vision in any world in which peace is possible. And so when people say, and I've had this with TV interviews, that do you support the two-state solution, yes or no? It's not as simple as that, because we have doubts about whether it is a solution, whether it would solve this conflict or whether it would aggravate it and make it worse. But these are long-term questions that we're going to have to engage with and discuss after the war. And for now, we're focusing 100% on the task of total victory against Hamas, because however we imagine peace in the future, there is no room for Hamas in any of those visions.
I've heard you speak quite rightly about total victory over Hamas. What about the hostages? Because at the same time, we're hearing, and we hear quite a lot on the media here about hostages, and some of what the Israeli military is doing at the moment is at odds with what the hostage families want in terms of returning their loved ones. Is there anything you can say about that?
On the contrary, I cycled past the Azrieli Towers this morning, and the hostages' families have taken out a huge advertising campaign on the side of the towers. And the slogan there was, Lo otzrim ad shekulam chozrim, no stopping until everyone's home.
Yeah.
Because our strategy, which we accept, people had questions about, legitimate questions, vindicated itself with the last hostage release pause. We said we're going to put unrelenting military pressure on Hamas, and in exchange for giving them a breather from getting clobbered, they will give back hostages. And that worked until Hamas decided that it didn't need a break anymore and wanted to resume the military campaign. And that's what we're doing now. We're putting more military pressure on Hamas. Now, I had an interview with Sangita Maiska on LBC over the weekend, and she told me, in the end, you got the hostages out through negotiations. Clearly, talking works. But the military campaign is what gives Hamas a reason to talk to us in the first place. It creates the leverage because we want hostages back. Hamas wants a couple of days to catch its breath. And that was how we got the last batch of hostages out. And we're open, of course, to another pause in the fighting in order to get hostages out. We did it before. We'll gladly do that again, because it is a central goal of this war to get the hostages out. I'm not, I'm one of many Israelis walking around with this dog tag that says, bring them home now. And in Hebrew, it says, Halev shelanu shavui be'aza. Our hearts are held hostage, are trapped in Gaza, because that is why we are fighting. And sometimes you have to pinch yourselves and say, we've got nearly half the hostages out, but 129 people still trapped in there is still one of the world's worst hostage crises ever. Yeah. And we are committed to the pledge that there will be no one left behind. We're going to bring back the women and the men, the young and the old, the civilians and the soldiers. None of us are free until all of them are free.
Thank you.
And by the way, I'll take this opportunity to thank anyone who has been raising awareness of the hostages, whether it's through the physical posters that have been torn down or the digital billboards as well. We cannot afford to show weakness in the face of this persistent campaign of dehumanization of Israelis and Jews. And if they tear down the posters, put them back up. And I think it's one of the most inspiring campaigns of civil disobedience I've ever seen.
I agree. And the wearing of dog tags, which many of us are walking around London wearing now, which we need to continue to do.
When people ask you, why are you wearing, explain. It's so important.
Yeah, I agree. Is there anything else that we can be doing here that would help? We're trying to make our voices heard. Anything else that would help your cause?
This is an incredible moment of Jewish unity that has awakened, I think, a lot of people who even were not so attached to their Jewish identities, but like Stephen Fry, we're seeing now delivering the alternative Christmas message, I am a Jew, because they look around them and it's like they swallowed the blue pill in the Matrix. The world is not what they thought it was. They realize that enlightened society is actually a pretty dark place. They realize who their people are, and they realize that their values cohere with being proud members of the Jewish people, as opposed to trying to ingratiate themselves with people who dehumanize us. So I know you're trying to donate money. Israel is going to be paying the bill for this generations ahead. There is going to be so much work to do after this war to rebuild the country. This country is going to need a lot of therapy. It's important that philanthropists as well think about how they're going to shift their priorities to rebuild this country stronger after the war. Anyone who wants to come on solidarity missions and volunteer. As we speak, my mother is on a plane here from London and wants to come here and volunteer with my sister. Anyone who wants to come as well, there are all sorts of initiatives, even if it's just cooking spaghetti for soldiers. But really the most important thing is speaking out, making your voices heard. The enemy is trying to make people ashamed of being identified with Israel, of speaking up for Israel. And we have to be louder and prouder than ever and give decision makers backing and support to remind them of the courage of their convictions. We're going to win this war. It will take as long as it takes. And we want our allies and friends to stand with us and to speak up clearly in favor of our right to win this war, instead of couching it in terms that can end up damaging our efforts. So really giving backing to decision makers, speaking loud and clear, not abandoning the public sphere to people who hate Israel or saying there's nothing we can do. You know, people are going to pay a price for sticking up for Israel. We are paying a price for this war. I saw just now Deborah Messing is in Israel, Grace from Will of Grace. Her first time ever in Israel, I was astonished. First of all, how do you reach adult age never having visited Israel? But also, how do you, as someone who've never visited Israel, suddenly put yourself in a position where you're putting your neck on the line and saying, I am standing up for Israel's right to win this war? It's inspiring, and we need to mobilize more of that spirit and understanding that the world has changed in a very dramatic way, and we need to be on the winning side, on the moral side, and not let the other side, after the brutal atrocities of October 7th, cow us into submission.
I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are. We're going to wrap up now. I will be in trouble if I don't ask you about your famous eyebrows.
What's your question?
How they seem to have taken on a media life of their own.
I'm getting stopped for selfies in the street by people who want to take pictures with their eyebrows raised. There are WhatsApp stickers, there are memes. It's become my trademark. I'm going on TV and I'm being asked to replicate it. It's crazy to think how that one moment shifted everything, because it was only my 150th interview. And until then, Israelis hadn't noticed that there was a team. By the way, it's not just me. It's also the legendary ambassador Mark Regev and Tal Heinrich as well, who are doing Hasbara. And suddenly one split-second decision to pull a face suddenly made the whole country realize that Hasbara was taking place, and boosted my social media profile as well. And I'm sharing in the chat now, I don't know whether this is going out to everyone, a link where you'll have links to all the social media. So if you're not following me on Telegram, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the other ones, then follow, and I'm constantly pumping out content, and that will hopefully give you the information and the messages that you need to make Israel's case.
Perfect. We'll make sure everyone gets that. But thank you for your time. And on a serious note, we are really grateful for the work that you're doing on behalf of all of us.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
We're
Louis.
very proud
Thank you.
as a Brit. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope to see you all in Israel sooner rather than later.
See you again in Israel. Look forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, keep calm, carry on. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. We're very grateful for joining us for another one of UJI's briefings. And please, if you are able to donate at www.uji.org, we would be incredibly grateful. Thank you.